I kind of wanted to talk about a roadmap of where we think technology is right now and where it's going to end up. So this is, and I definitely want to get your input into a lot of this. I put these as a couple road markers for us to be able to talk about. But certainly this year, some of the big things that are coming up is that there's a lot of the 802.11n APs and controllers, that generation of equipment that's coming up on end of life the first half of next year. So as we're talking to clients, being able to take a look to see if they have any N only APs that are out there or N generation controllers that, the N controllers, they definitely support some of the newer standards, but there is a generation of controllers there that's coming up, that's getting long in the tooth, and it's going to probably be removed from most networks in the next year. So it's something we should definitely be aware of. The Wi-Fi 6 clients are out there today. A lot of our phones and new PCs are going to have AX clients in them already. Some of the commercial stuff, even with cable providers, they're deploying, 6 APs out in the consumer environments. So it's definitely the products are there. The manufacturers have verified 6 components that are out there for us to build those networks today. Um, One of the things that I think that as people are planning, if they are migrating from some of that older equipment to Wi-Fi 6, one of the biggest things that I would recommend is having those new environments really designed for 5 gigahertz from the start. I know that, we've been through this for a long time, and we've all complained about the fact that, we're dealing with networks that have APs that were installed, 2 generations of APs that were installed in the same physical locations they were in 2003, right? So, they're still planned for 2.4 gig. 2.4 gig radiuses haven't changed that dramatically. As we're starting to move, as we're starting to see what the advantages are in 6, like moving away from 2.4 as a primary access for a lot of our clients is really, I think, going to have a lot of benefits. We talked about 6E. One of the things that some of the RF engineers that I've listened to speaking, they actually anticipate that the radiuses for the cells in 6 are going to be similar to 5. Not that you won't have to redesign, but it should be fairly close. It's going to have performance characteristics closer to 5 gigahertz than 2.4 for sure. Um, so as we start looking into next year, we might see some 6E clients. Um, the replacement of that end stuff, we should start seeing a lot more of Wi-Fi 6 being deployed because the APs are out there now. Um, Even the hospitality APs, which are usually on the trailing end of new development, those are even actually being announced at this point for hotels and residence halls and those kind of things. So, um,
So Jeff, do you mind if I interject something real quick?
absolutely.
I, yeah, I just wanted to highlight something as far as the difference in waves and some of the information that I found. So yeah, like I said, is one of the key core features. It's OFDMA is going to be part of Wave 1. The new MIMO, just for the downlink, and the target wait time are all a part of Wave 1. And they're slotting the full uplink downlink for new MIMO, and the BSS coloring is going to be part of Wave 2. So there's no actual timing on any of this, but at the same time, it's just interesting to know that we're not going to be getting that BSS and the full MIMO capability right off the bat.
It might be interesting to see if whether that wave 2 just coincides and whether there will really be a wave 2 or whether it'll just be included in the 6E generation of equipment, right? Um, because maybe they're looking at that as, when the interesting thing is you get that new 6E equipment, it's going to have 3 radios in it, right? 2.4, 5 gig, and 6 gig. So again, thinking about how much power these things are going to pull. There's a whole generation of, we may have a whole lot fewer physical ports that are in the network, but we're going to have giant power supplies in the closets.
Yeah.
I think with just some of the first iteration Wave 1 stuff, that I had hung myself, I remember looking up and seeing that some of these new 6 capable APs are somewhere towards, 50 watts for something that was going to be indoors and just something that was, a common user office environment. you know, which is what, 3 or 4 times, the 15 or whatever's
Oh, yeah.
allotted by the PoE. So it's drastically larger. And then you start getting into the switching requirements for these APs. As far as power constraints, that's going to change things.
What I have seen in the first not the initial offerings, but the follow-ups that I've seen right now is that most of the manufacturer stuff that I've seen will actually, with the current Wi-Fi 6 APs, will actually be supported with PoE plus. So we're still under 30 watts, but I think we're at 30 watts. And they actually, interestingly enough, they will power up with AT or with rather than PoE plus. With PoE, they just will turn off radios, so they'll be functional. They just won't have all the radios and capabilities. What will be interesting though is that when you add that additional radio in there, as it is, you're at the limit of PoE plus. I think when we start talking about Wi-Fi 6 and that additional radio, I think it's real easy to see that you start pushing over UPoE territory, like 60 watts or under. Um, and that's, again, that could be a major impact to people in their closets, right? Um, if they move to Wi-Fi as the primary access at that point, maybe they don't need as many switches, but they're going to need big power supplies in those things, because UPoE switches are going to pull a lot. You're going to draw a lot more from the closets.
Yeah, that's interesting because at that point, cost, you have to look at cost, right? And so if you're looking to push over 60 watts, say we get to 60 watts, right? If you're looking 60 watts per port, as we have to support 15 watts per port on the PoE side now. Um, and you have different technologies like stack power and stuff like that for a stacked switch or something like that, right? You currently can still maintain a one use switch, but if you're talking 60 watts, that's a scale of 4 times what's on a particular port maybe today, and 2 times what are considered maximum. The power supplies would have to grow in size, I would imagine.
For
Um,
sure.
if the power supplies grow in size, the switch most likely would have to grow in size, which would impact the footprint from a rack space type of thing. So potentially,
Potentially.
um, if
Or
that
maybe
becomes
even
the
be
case,
external.
yeah, I mean,
Oh
there's
God.
there's the thought process. Yeah,
I remember those.
I hope it doesn't go that way, but uh,
Yeah.
I mean, the possibility exists. So it'd be interesting as like a parallel, right? Like in the video game world, right? You have this idea of a physical disc where you can put it into your PlayStation or whatnot, and then you have this digital footprint, right, where you can kind of download a game or something and not have the disc, that type of thing, right? Where it becomes a situation like that. Whereas from a business side of things, right? The idea of the potential for a bigger footprint on the physical side, physical media or physical boxes. AU costs money to an organization, right? When you go from 1U to 2U, right, there's a cost associated. Um, if it all boils down, right? So does the cost of going from a 1 to 2U box, or the space of the new power requirements, right? I'd be interested to see if this gets the right adoption rate, whether that pushes things toward an all wireless environment from a
Mm,
cost side of things. Is it
sure.
enough to tip the scale to start considering all wireless if power requirements get too great? You know, from a from a uh, from a what provides the power. Does that
No,
footprint become too big?
there's definitely a trickle down there. I mean, certainly on the switch side in the closets. I mean, if you have low density, it's going to be probably new switches. I mean, if you have higher density, I know a lot of people have, they may have switches that have a power, a stacking power bus or something like that. So, there's more flexibility there to add additional power supplies into the stack and share some of that capability. But in the end, I mean, it also may drive some of these power supplies to be 220 rather than 110. And like there's a trickle down effect for cost, right? That's more panel space, that's new electrical,
Yep.
that's that all adds up as some of that stuff comes into play.
Co-location costs.
Sure.
If you were to, if all of your 1U switches became 2U switches,
Yeah.
as a standard, just to be able to support higher power requirements.
Is there
I'm not
all
sure. It's interesting.
It's all
It's
stuff that
interesting.
we're going to have to work through with our clients to make sure those power budget calculators are going to become real important. Um, as we keep going through the rest of this, the big milestones are in 2021. We got the end generation stuff coming into life, so that's projects that we're probably talking to clients with about right now. 2024, a lot of the AC Wave 1 APs are going to start coming into life as well. So, you know, between 2021 and 2024, we should see a lot of Wi-Fi 6 deployment just because it doesn't make any sense for anybody to deploy anything else, right? Even a life cycle itself is going to drive adoption. What I'm hopeful about is that if people start looking at new facilities, that they might be looking at Wi-Fi first access and things like that, just to give them more flexibility with their workforce. How they're occupying buildings, how much cabling they need to pull, a lot of those things. And being on the early end of adoption for this, we see those standards last 6 years. The standards this before a new standard comes out, and then it's still sold for a couple years after that, and then you got 5 years of a tail of support, right? So being on the early end of Wi-Fi 6 deployment, I mean, you might see 10 to 12 years out of some of these APs if you don't need to upgrade to, if you don't want to go to 6E or 6 Wave 2 or something like that. So I mean, being on the early side of this with the life cycle updates. I mean, there's a long life cycle in some of this equipment, which is good. Um, I know Ed, you sent something over to the team the other day about what Wi-Fi 7 is and what's going to be included in it.
Yeah. Well, that was just like kind of a goof, but at the same time, it's like, this isn't for 6 to 8 years, but take a look, here's something else that's coming down the line. So,
And it was kind of
and then with that, the focus then goes right back to not so much on efficiency, but back to power throughput. Just that perspective. It's like where we're at now and what beliefs and bounds we've done with HE. It's like, yeah, we're going to go right back to trying to improve throughput again.
And it was kind of interesting, like with that. I mean, reading that article, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. But then I went back and looked. I said, okay, when did the Wi-Fi 6, the 11AX, initial drafts actually start getting developed? And it was right about the same time AC was approved. So it makes sense. They're on sort of a 6-year life cycle, and whatever's in there now, I bet it changes between now and then. But at the same time, like they're not giving up. There's going to be a lot more and more development. And what's kind of interesting is that the architectures between 5G and Wi-Fi, LTE, 5G, the cellular side of this, and the Wi-Fi side, more and more of the architectures are starting to look more and more similar. What 5G and LTE do well were some of the new additions that we're starting to see in here. There's more channel reuse. There's, some of the things they were talking about in Wi-Fi 7 is actually scheduling transmission between APs on different, so you can actually overlap cells. That's all stuff that the cellular network does today. So it's kind of interesting to see these two things start, coming together. And like, at what point do they just turn into the same thing? Like, it could be over time that the differences between the two aren't dramatic enough to really drive adoption one way or the other.
Well, I mean, if you think about things too, to that point, I mean, I could see this. So this at first, right, when computing came in, right, it was more of like you would see it at colleges, right, schools, colleges. It was a developmental thing, right. As time went on, it became a business thing, right, where it was business productivity was the impetus. I think Windows NT 4.0 or something like that, where it was a business application. And then there was token ring, Ethernet, that type of stuff, and that was to facilitate business connections, right? We're at a point now where these things, these technologies are used in everything. So it's no longer it's no longer an academic thing. It's no longer a business thing. It's an do everything for everyone thing. Where I'm going with that is now that it's a do something for everyone type of paradigm within the world. I think you're going to see development standards, the importance of standards. I think you're going to see workflow toward developing standards increase exponentially to the point where it wouldn't surprise me if you started seeing standards being ratified every year, every 2 years as things moved on.
Yeah, I mean the tail end of that though, that one of the things that drives this is the manufacturers, right? So like what so even like TWT was part of a second standard or a separate standard that was specifically around that being able to set specific timeframes. They rolled it into the AX standard, but there was a working body working on that entirely separately. So I think a lot of that is already happening. But
Yeah,
at some point on the tail end of all of this is manufacturers actually making silicon and
sure.
programming to actually be able to do it. So, I think that to your point, like the evolution of this technology isn't changing. If anything, it probably is advancing, even maybe more rapidly than it has in the past. But at the tail end of all this, they still have to make physical things, and they're probably going to need to keep those manufacturing lines running for a certain period of time. So it'll be interesting to see what that next standard looks like and whether we see whether it maintains that 6-year cycle that we saw these last two times or whether we see something that's even more aggressive than that, because we can already see that the first generation of 6 doesn't include the 6 gigahertz radio, so there's probably a second generation of manufacturing that already we see coming up in 2 years, right? 2 or 3 years of new AP, another generation of new APs that are in there. But there's a lot of Wi-Fi 6 is cool. Like there's a lot of things here that I'm excited about. I know that we've all been kind of as we dug into the details, I think all of us really were changed our perspective on how we're going to be designing a lot of this stuff moving forward. uh, and I want to thank all of you for being a part of this discussion. One of the things I did want to talk about is what we might want to actually have as topics for additional follow-up um, in the future, because certainly the scope of this discussion ended up being a lot bigger than what we initially planned on, and we'll probably cut this up into smaller chunks in the future. But is there anything that going through the process of having this discussion that came up that you think it would be worthwhile digging into as a team in the future?
I think the trying to get a game plan or trying to get an understanding of what a deeper dive on what IoT really is, and how do we encapsulate that within a space in supporting technology. Like if I think about it, right, from the company side of things, we as engineers, you could look at security and then as a vertical and then sub vertical as firewalls, right? IoT would be something within the wireless space, a wireless vertical, but I'm not sure anybody fully understands what it looks like, what requirements are for supporting it. I just don't see it as a tangible thing right now, and I'd be interested to see how that is baking out. That's
Hmm.
something I'd like to see.
No, like we definitely have a couple. We have a couple that we have a whole bunch of different industries that we work in, and I think that what we actually see being deployed out there IoT wise varies dramatically from one to the other. Whether you're talking about PLC systems in manufacturing facilities, or whether you're talking about Bluetooth beacons in a public facility. I mean, they all fall under the IoT umbrella. They're dealt with very, very differently.
Right.
Yeah. How about you, Ed? Is there anything you've been thinking about that you wanted to have a
I
follow up
mean, this
about?
has been the one big thing that, I've been just really thinking about for quite some time. And, beyond this too, as far as any kind of other type of emerging technologies or new stuff that we'll more or less have to kind of wrestle with and try and figure out as we go. And this was the one big thing that really stood out to me.
How about you, Joe?
I don't know how it would fit into this, but I mean, do you want to do something on? We could do troubleshooting, planning. We have different wireless tools.
No, yeah, I mean, it's the things I think you and I have talked about is in some of these previous discussions is maybe doing, recommended practices. What should people be doing?
Yes.
What should they be doing for troubleshooting?
As you mentioned, the planning for Wi-Fi 6 is going to be more 5 gigahertz. Still have clients that do a swap 1-for-1 with newer APs just because of end of life or something. But there's rarely or seldom a new wireless plan because we moved to a new generation of Wi-Fi. So best practices and planning, I think that would be we could work around that a lot.
No, definitely. And I think we could probably talk about, the RF analysis and RF design as well as, I know that we've also talked, each one of us have dealt with clients that have done a generation of equipment replacement and not actually enabled the new wireless standards as part of that as well. So some of the, there might be some recommended practices that we have for actual configuration that might be worth talking about. As I said, each one of us have had our own experiences with that, and looking back on it, there's great opportunities for improvement even in current environments just by enabling some of those new developments that have been released in those interim releases. Something like we talked about that interim release for TWT. Not everything was deployed with that, but there's other things that are out there for roaming that are especially whether it's R or K or V, a whole bunch of additional standards that just help clients roam around. Um, I know that some of the things that I talked about before is 6E might actually be worth discussing in more detail once it becomes more mature. Open roaming is definitely something that I think there's more detail into with our clients that have more of a public facility rather than private manufacturing or something like that. I think that there is a need for a more smooth guest experience. And being able to really understand what that analytics that you're actually going to be able to take advantage of with your handheld devices. I think there's definitely some things that I'd like to get into down the road with some of that as well. How about you, Jacob? Is there anything that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit curious where wireless fits in like network overlays, software-defined access, software-defined networking.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Wi-Fi 6 or any new technology, like is this something that can be automated like our data center and our access? I'd like to just if we could talk about where wireless fits in there, or if it is wireless smart enough to
Yeah, that's a good one, I think, Jake.
to be able to automate some of these things, and does the Wi-Fi 6 AX, wonder if that has anything that can help.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think there's a whole generation of new controllers with a lot of the manufacturers that all coincide with the release of AX. It's things from each one of the manufacturers that have major upgrades in the last couple of years. Um, that we went from autonomous APs to controller based APs to things that are more hybrid, doing local switching or software defined access kind of pieces.
One of the
tying all
talks.
this together. There's a lot of different.
Yeah.
There are now a whole lot of different deployment methods for these things, and it'll be interesting for that. That is an interesting topic for us to talk about. What we see as being what's been successful and where things are going. There's each one of those deployment mechanisms are things that we've seen in production today in environments. And it may be that some solutions have long legs and we see that continuing the way that they're working today. And could be that some of those have obvious evolutionary replacements in the next generation of stuff too. So yeah, that's a great idea. Well, with that, I'll tie this up. I really appreciate all of your time. I know that we ended up getting into a little bit more deeper depth than we initially planned on, but I definitely appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to have this discussion. I look forward to having additional discussions in the future. So,
yeah, it was good, guys. Thanks.
Yep. Good job, everybody.
Cool.
All right.
Very good.
Take care, guys.
All right.
See you, everybody.